Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
Lech, Lecha. Let's start at the beginning. Very good place to start. I'm really just kind of riffing on the very first pasuk. Rabbi Schatz, I know, has also been exploring that in a couple of different places. Were you going to go into second, third pasuk as well, or were we just going to hang with numero uno?
No, you can go into the second, third. That's fine.
Great. They are evocative words. They're words many of us know quite well. It is the big call out to our forefather. I'm actually there's not much context to give because there isn't a lot of narrative context. Although I will say, foregrounding something that came to mind as I was thinking about this verse, it remains interesting how little we know about this guy heading in, considering the role he ends up having for us, right? It is, even though we know his genealogy and his place of origin, it remains interesting that we actually really know very little about this person who holds such a pivotal role in who we are as a people. And I think there's some interesting pieces to explore and think about there in terms of these frameworks. So just diving right in, Vayomer Adonai El Avram, God says to Avram, Lech Lecha mi artzecha umi moladecha umi beit avicha el haaretz asher areka. Translating Lech Lecha, I feel like gives the lie of how you're understanding it, since it's a phrase that has been translated and retranslated and interpreted and reinterpreted. So I'll just stick with the bare bones JPS here, even though there's much more to say about it. Go forth from your land, from your birthplace, from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I shall make you a great nation. I will bless you. And I will make your name great. I will increase your name. And you shall be a blessing. Should I go one more, Rabbi Schatz, or is that sufficient for our purposes?
Yeah, I think that's sufficient.
Okay. So,
you should introduce the topic, and then we can decide that.
I will, in fact, do just that. So the way that we've sort of stumbled into doing this is that after reading through the verses, I'll sort of like foreground the mental health and or spiritual growthiness parts that are kind of calling to me out of the verses, and then open it up to kushiot, both in terms of the more conventional way that we were doing it, in terms of textual issues or inconsistencies or clarifications that you have about the verses themselves, or if you are sort of feeling curious about the more topical piece that I'm yammering on about, we can explore that too. So kind of one and a half thoughts that came to mind from me on this, which is, I'm going to pop out to see, quick show of hands. Folks know, give me a wave or something if you know Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey kind of stuff. Folks know that?
Bonnie does.
Yeah, Bonnie, Denise, Karen, Marley. So it seems like, yeah, Kybal, right? So thinking about this through that lens. So I'll be interested to hear what folks have to say in response to that, because that's part of what I'm thinking about here. Not just Avram as the man who becomes Avraham and who is the progenitor of the Jewish people, but thinking about this in sort of that archetypical construct of someone who is about to embark upon the hero's journey. But what's interesting about the hero's journey, and I have here, because I know some people are visual learners in the house, Rabbi Schatz, this one's for you. So here's sort of a little diagram of a very bare bones sense of what the hero's journey is. Joseph Campbell, who was a scholar of myth. And I have lots of books here for show and tell today. So there's the Hero with 1,000 Faces. Oh, Rabbi Schatz, look, it's a mosaic. It's a mosaic. Look at that. I didn't even think about that until just now. And Joseph Campbell also wrote a book called The Inner Reaches of Outer Space, which is sort of tipping off the next place I'm going with this. oftentimes in the hero's journey, in that archetypical kind of understanding of what it is to go out, to be called to adventure, to go out, to sort of conquer the challenges that you're facing, to get the reward that you're going for, and then you return home. That's sort of the completing piece of the arc, because it's usually thought of as a circle. What's interesting is that Avraham doesn't go home, right? The story of Avraham is that he dafka leaves and he never comes back. So it's an interesting kind of inversion of what sort of across cultures and across myths is usually what happens, that someone is called, they go out into the world, they fight their battles, they slay their demons, they get what they're trying to get, and then they bring that back home. But Avraham actually goes, right? He steps out into the unknown and just sort of keeps walking. So I think that that's an interesting idea. And the piece that I'll sort of invite each of us to think about is how we navigate the unknown, right? To the land that I will show you. That's tough, right? It's tough to step out into the world knowing there's always a lot that we don't know, but there's a lot to step out into the world knowing I am very much stepping out into the realm of things I really don't know what's going to happen next. And so thinking for myself and inviting us to think about, how do you navigate the unknown? How do you build a capacity for trust? When can you do that? When is that challenging for you? I think there's a lot of interesting questions there, sort of refracted through the prism of this story. And then the one other wrinkle I'll throw out there is I was reading a few teachings talking about how this is both an external journey and also an internal journey, right? That yes, he is physically journeying, he's packing up all his stuff, he's getting ready to go, but along with that is also the journey sort of within, to explore himself more deeply, to look within himself, to see what he might learn about himself, and also that involves leaving behind different pieces of his identity that he has previously had before, and asking the questions, okay, what is the journey, not that I'm just being called to take on out in the world, but what's the journey that I'm being called to take on within myself, to explore myself more deeply, to get to know myself more intimately, to unearth the parts of myself that I might not yet have explored, and to then come out on the other side. Those are the pieces that I'm thinking about. That's already plenty of stuff to throw out there. So I'm happy to riff on any or all of those things further, but I'll pause there for now.
Okay, so we'll take Kushiyot now. So if anybody has any questions, whether about what Rabbi Shapiro was just explaining or about the verses themselves. So Karen, I saw your hand first, and then Tybal.
I don't know if my memory is totally gone, but why Abraham?
Yeah, great question. It's a question that someone actually asked in my Midrashah class yesterday. And I mentioned that there are lots of source sheets on Sefaria that are called Why Abraham that I didn't look into because that wasn't my topic that I was teaching. But it's a really great question. And one of the things that Rabbi Shapiro said at the beginning of class was, we don't need to give you much context because this is the first time, not that we're being introduced to the name Avram, but this is kind of the first time that Avram has a scene, so to speak, in the play, right? That he comes out on stage for the first time and all of a sudden he's being told to go somewhere else. I think that we will come to understand why Avram throughout his story. I think it's not as apparent from the beginning of his story why Avram. Rabbi Shapiro is scrolling, so maybe he has an answer. You're just telling us where he came from?
Only scrolling up to sort of illustrate your point, right? Which is that we hear that his dad was Terach. We know he has brothers, and we know where he comes from, right? So and we know that Sarai didn't have any kids, but that's it. That's all we know about him.
So why him?
Yes.
Why the son of that person?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. I mean, the answer the answer still stands. We don't really know, but as we learn more about Abraham, like when we move away from Abraham, when Abraham dies, Karen, ask this question again, right? Because then we'll have actual implication for his character and for the experiences that he's both lived, but also given us to learn from. And then we can answer that question again. Right now, it's a great question and we don't have an answer. Okay. There's lots of hands. Tybal, Renee, Marlise, Denise, Elon. Oh, that rhymed.
So first, actually, I wanted to just say something in response to Karen and then go to what I thought of. One reason might be because can you think given that the people whose foundational narrative is the word was created with words, this person could not have been named and renamed any better. I mean, for starting a new nation, who could have a better name?
Do you know that midrash?
No, what Avram means and what Avraham means.
Yeah, so that's the midrash on his name. It's actually one of the things that our bat mitzvah, one of the benot mitzvah tomorrow, Lila Shemansky is actually talking about, that the midrash says that his name is Avraham, which is Av Hamon Goyim. Yeah, so it sounded weird coming out of my mouth. But the father of a multitude of nations is actually, his name is an acrostic for that. I have poster board in my office that I could show you the acrostic that she's going to be using tomorrow. But it is talking about.
Is she using the poster board in her drash?
Yeah.
Is that because you told her you're a visual learner and you need to see things?
We can talk about this offline, maybe.
Wait,
Rabbi?
Rabbi?
Time will continue.
I didn't mean the midrash. I just meant the shot of what the name is. But
yeah.
Where Rabbi Shapiro started when he talked about Joseph Campbell, I went from there to Odysseus, because in part my first year of college, Odyssey and Iliad I read 4 times in 2 different courses, and however many different courses. And I thought a little bit about the difference between someone who travels physically and comes back potentially not so changed versus someone who comes back but is not as changed as someone who travels, doesn't come back, and the difference in changes, though after I know not everybody was there last night, but if I understood Rabbi Schatz correctly, she doesn't buy into the whole 10 trials of Avraham thing as trials. But
correct.
Still, however one would characterize them, and whichever 10 is in the 10, I just thought that was very interesting as a different way to look at travel as the change in the human being, not the geography.
Yeah. Great. I think that's a really great point, and plays into the different kinds of journeys that people go on, right? There's different kinds of journeys. There are different ways in which people come back from journeys and how they affect them. It's a great point. Okay, Renee.
So I was just curious whether it says go forth from your native land and from your father's house.
Yeah. Or
if those are both necessarily the same place.
Well, so what we talked about last night in our class was that, back in the day, it was always the same place. There was not far enough to go that saying your land and your birthplace were so different, right? As opposed to today, where someone could be born in Germany and live their whole life in Chicago, right? You could have very different places, but back in the day, that it would have been the same. So that
the native land and his father's house. But
I would say, I'm just going to jump right.
Well, it's missing one, right?
Yeah,
Me'artzecha is land, like so I'll explain it the way that I did last night. Me'artzecha is like the U.S. Then Umi Moladetcha is like California, and Umi Beit Avicha is Thayer Avenue, where my parents live, right? So it's these concentric circles getting smaller and smaller into the intimacy of Avram's existence.
And there's an interesting just parallelism there in terms of hearing the story of the Akedah.
Yeah.
And God says to Abraham, Kach et, right, here's Ma'artzecha u'mimoladetcha u'mibeit avicha, right? When God says then later to Abraham, Kach et bincha et yechidcha asher ahavcha et Yitzchak, right? That there's those sort of layers of clarification about what God is calling to Abraham to do, which is just an interesting parallelism.
Yeah. For those of you there last night, that was the second commentary that we looked at also. Okay, Marlies.
I was not there last night.
You are not a woman.
I had a couple different questions. One is thinking about the hero's journey. If it could be said that Abraham, creates a new home for himself, and whether that could be conceived of, in that hero's journey framework somehow. That seems like that's something that each person is called to leave their parents' home and, become their own person. And then I noticed this last night that like the me'artzecha, and the end, show you arecha. I mean, they look similar. I know it's different root words, but I guess is it re'eh for showing or seeing?
Yeah, arecha, it comes from the root re'eh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I know, but I just noticed that. So I wondered if there was any kind of relationship between those words. It seemed interesting.
Not in so much as it's towards Abraham, right? That I will show you your land, your birthplace. The suffix of each word is showing that it's directional to Abraham, but other than that, there's no other kind of syntactic connection. Yeah.
Okay.
Denise.
Okay, so two thoughts. One of them regarding Avram and the hero Joseph Campbell quest.
Yeah.
So Joseph Campbell is also really into archetypes, and I never thought of it before this class right now, but this little passage is sort of like the archetypical story of the Jewish people. Like, we're constantly having to leave and go somewhere else and get better, and leave and go somewhere else and get better. And so maybe maybe this isn't so much of a hero story as an archetype story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I mean, I don't know so much. Rabbi Shapiro can speak more directly to the connection there, but I love the idea of seeing this as an overarching theme of just our people in general, that this is the introduction to what our people are going to go through.
Right. I mean, it's kind of amazing to think about, like, 5,000 years ago, who knew that narrative would repeat probably 5,000 times at least.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. And it didn't happen to every culture. It happened to us, right? It's not like everybody's always moving around. We are.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of an interesting thing. And then as far as, like, fear of the unknown and that, like, for me personally, I've never been afraid of the unknown. I'm not like a super gutsy person, but when I've been held back, or when I've held myself back, it's not because of the unknown. It's more often because of the known. So, like, I know how people in my life react to things, and therefore I didn't take a chance because I knew the kind of reaction it would get, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But the unknown feels kind of safe to me in a way.
Interesting. Shapiro, anything you want to say specifically to the connection piece to what you shared earlier?
I mean, I have thought. Elon's been waiting. I definitely have thoughts, but Elon has been waiting a while, so I'm happy to hold my tongue just a moment.
Okay, great, Elon.
You can go ahead. I'm happy to wait longer.
Okay. Ping pong back. Yeah, I mean, Denise, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that second piece about fear of unknown. I mean, I think fear of unknown is relatively common. I certainly feel the need to sort of sum up a good amount of, energy and courage to jump into something new, particularly when I don't know or don't think I know what the outcome will be. So for me, there's something nice in this verse, sort of similar to what you're saying about how maybe this is, sort of a mini summation of what we will each experience. Like, well, if Abraham can at 75 pick up and go somewhere brand new, maybe I can, try a new pizza place or whatever it is. Obviously, I like trying new pizza places, but if he can do it, so can I. Something like that. That there's something reassuring knowing that within the DNA of us as people, there has been someone who has gone before, right? All of our ancestor who's gone before us to show us how to do that. But I clearly you have embodied that so completely that you don't need that support. So that's good. It is interesting that you hold this up, saying, well, maybe he's like our own sort of unique, like, mini archetype, since we've always been wandering. Although I was also thinking about how, there is have like at least 2.5 different thoughts on this, but it's interesting that once we get to Canaan, we actually do kind of have the hero's journey from there, right? Like the story of the Torah is, well, we go down to Egypt and then we wander all the way back, right? There is the return, except again for how there isn't, right? Like the Torah ends on kind of a cliffhanger, right? Like we don't go in until Joshua, right? We get all the way almost there, and then Moses dies, and well, it seems like it's implied we go in, but if you don't read Yoshua, you don't read about us going in, right? So there is something interesting in our DNA as well about like not quite getting there. I remember in rabbinical school, Rav Pinchas Geller talked about the Jewish messianic impulse about being always not quite there, right? We're always not quite there. No, not quite there. And that's part of what was so fascinating about the second half of the 20th century with the emergence of Israel is like, it's been a very long time since we've actually really returned. We've learned how to wander really well. What does it mean to actually have a place we're returning to? That is a brand new kind of thing. So anyway, there's a lot in all of that, I think, but it's an interesting idea, Denise, to have like Abraham is like embedded as sort of like one of the progenitors of like our own sort of unique archetype in that way. It's interesting.
Elon, the floor is yours.
So I want to go back to why Avram, and I actually really like the fact that there is no big build-up to Avram, right? It's just they give us his lineage, and then they say, and the Lord said to Avram. And to me, this makes it much more universal, and you can read this and say, you know what? You don't have to be some great character with a lot of feats, a lot of strength, a lot of intellectual ability, but you can go on this journey regardless of who you are, right? And to me, I don't know, it may just be random, but to me that definitely resonates.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it plays into also like the humility around Avram, that he just does all these things, right? We think of Noah as very naive in terms of being called Tamim Bedorotav, but I actually think that Avram really approaches our story, but also the world with just this sense of wonder and question. And sure, anybody's invited into my tent, right? There's just this really beautiful humility about Avram. Sure, there are things he does along the way that are not perfect, but that makes him human. And so I agree with you. I like that there's no, let's talk about this guy, and he was the greatest in his nation, and what an amazing dude, and then all of a sudden to hear about him, but that he's just this person who listens to God. God says to go somewhere. Unlike Noah, he asks a few questions along the way as to like, why is this all happening to me? But that it does come with this sense of there's a higher purpose. I have partners in this world. I'm going to just kind of go with it, and ends up being a great leader, just despite kind of the pomp and circumstance. Rebecca.
So just continuing what Elon was saying, which I really liked, was that there's sort of a symmetry between Abraham and the land, because the land is showing up out of nowhere as well. We don't even know what the land is at this point. So they're both kind of anonymous initially.
That's very interesting, and it goes to actually the question that Marlies asked. According to the Eitz Chaim, which I went and got while Elon was asking his question, it's modern day Syria, and for us to be able to look at a map and say, oh, that's where he was going, that's one thing. But as you're pointing out, Rebecca, like, he doesn't even know where he's going. We don't know what this land is. We don't know what this land will bring, except for that God is saying that he's going to be made into a great nation, which we don't really know what that means either. Right? We hear the words, but we don't necessarily know what that means, except for if you know the rest of the Torah, you kind of understand it just intuitively because you've read the rest of the story. But But you're right that there is a really beautiful mirror in terms of the character, but also the experience, which I've never thought of before. But I really love that connection.
The other thing that, I mean, when you said bring the book off the shelf, the thing that it brought to mind for me is, I don't know about others, but like, I heard somebody talking about this relatively recently. We don't really know what it is to be lost anymore.
Yeah, so true.
Right? Like, when
even in our lifetime, right? Like, or at least I'm a little bit younger than you. Like in my,
You're 12,
when I started, I'm not 12. When I started driving, right, there was already this sense of like, I don't need a map. I don't need to even know how to read a map, right? My father would disagree wholeheartedly with that and tried to get me to read the Thomas Guide. And I remember telling this story to Bonnie actually, because she talked about that in terms of Larry used to do that with his kids, would try to get them to learn how to read maps and know where to go based on maps. You're right that we don't have that same sense of, if we get lost. I always feel differently when I'm in Israel, because even though I can have a GPS, I still just don't know the little streets as well. But it just, there's no sense of being sent somewhere and not knowing where you're going.
The last time I was really, really lost in a car was like 15 years ago. And it was when I had, or basically like 13 or 14 years ago, when I think it was my first year living in LA or second year. And I was staffing like a Los Angeles Hebrew High Shabbaton at Camp Ramah, and I'd never been up there before. And I like printed out directions and I missed the turnoff.
A MapQuest?
Yeah. Like, you printed out the things, blah, 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 and I missed it. And it was like a half hour. I was like, I think I missed it. And I had to turn it back up. But like, that was over a decade ago that I was like actually lost. And even then I kind of knew where I was. And I mean, I'll even, if I'm like driving home from the Grove, I'll sometimes pull it up on Google Maps to see if like Crescent Heights or La Cienega will be faster, even though I've made that drive hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just so antithetical to at least my current situation, to be told by a voice that I've never heard, and maybe I'm hallucinating. Go. Where? I don't know. I'll figure it out later. Like, what? What? You want me to do what? Right? Like, that's pretty bananas.
Right.
But to go back to one of the pieces I was saying at the beginning, the sense that we know where we're going is illusory, right? We don't know. How many times during the pandemic did we hear forecasts about when it's all going to be over? And nope. Right? Like, there are a lot of folks who make good money prognosticating, predicting, forecasting, and they're often wrong. There's a lot that we don't know, and there's certainly a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that I don't know about what my life holds, for good and for not so good. And I think for me, when I read this verse, it's a good reminder of that. It's a good reminder that there is a lot of uncertainty in the world, and the call is, yes, go out into that, but along with that I will be with you, right? God doesn't necessarily say it will be easy all along the way, but God does say I'll be with you, and that I will bless you. He doesn't say you'll never have tsaros, but he says I will bless you, and I think there is something really important and powerful in that.
Yeah.
Annie, you have your hand up.
Yes, well, if we're talking about mental health, we might also want to look into the fact that not every journey is one that takes us physically somewhere else. When we take a new job, it's an unknown. When we have children, in my case right now, I have a whole new life and I don't know where I'm going because I lost my spouse. So there's many times in our lives that we take these journeys that are within ourselves or within a smaller area that we need to deal with.
Absolutely. And I think there are different journeys at different stages of life, for sure. And I think it's also telling, I referenced this in passing, but I want to hit it even harder. Like, Avram gets this call at 75. He's had a life. He's already married, right? Like, usually when you think about someone hearing a call, it's in that like young adulthood phase when they're just starting to find their way, like graduating high school or coming out of college, or they've been working for a couple of years, and then they hear the number of times I've been asked by people, what did you hear a call to go to rabbinic? I don't know what that means. Maybe, I don't know. Rabbi, wait, I'm going to finish my thought. Then I'm very curious to hear how Rabbi Schatz answers this question. But I think it's telling that he's 75. He's already married. He's lived a good chunk of his life, and he gets this call to uproot and go somewhere brand new. I think there's something really evocative and powerful in that. That there is it's possible, right? It's always possible to go on the next phase of your journey, and B, that when you are called, there is someone who has done that before you and who has made it through, right? I think there's something really, really lovely in that, Rabbi Schatz.
Yes.
I have a question for you.
Oh, I didn't know.
When do folks ever ask you that? Like, oh, were you called to go to rabbinical school? Do you get that question?
I have been asked it in the past. Yes.
How do you respond to that question?
Well, it depends on who it's being asked by. If it's being
I'm asking you now in front of God, Torah, and all of these lovely Israelites. Rabbi Schatz.
Yes, Rabbi Shapiro.
Were you called to go to rabbinical school?
No. I think it's a very different when someone says my mom works at a preschool that is connected to, though it's a secular preschool, it's connected to a church. It's a UCC church. And the Reverend always talks about her calling. And I think that we have a very different experience with at least why I went to rabbinical school. I was really excited about working with people, and I was really excited about learning more Torah. And if that's a calling, then sure. But I definitely didn't feel like God was telling me that I needed to do this. I often reverse the question by saying I think that it's a continued calling. I think that there are certain moments in what I do as a rabbi that remind me that this is the right thing for me to be doing. But I don't associate that with any kind of spiritual guidance of this is what you were meant to do. It's much more so process theology, I would say, in terms of my rabbinate than kind of personal God in that way.
Okay, now I see Rebecca has her hands up. We're doing a lot of audience polling today. I want to do a quick show of hands. Raise your hand if in your life you have felt called to do something.
Wow.
Split almost evenly. It's really interesting.
But I think that it is an interesting question, and we're not going to do another poll. But I think that
we're doing polls. Polls are good.
But I think that there's I would have put my hand up for that, but I wasn't necessarily called into the rabbinate. Like when my aunt literally called me and said, "Will you come with me to be my partner in picking up my now cousin to adopt him from Detroit," that felt like a very spiritual calling because my uncle had passed away. I was taking his place. Like that to me was definitely a calling. I don't think that my profession in that way is the same kind of experience. But anyway, we can get into this another time. But
no, why another time? This is a great time to be getting. This is fantastic. Yeah, Rebecca.
This has nothing to do with calling.
Oh, we're letting Schatz off the hook. I shouldn't have called on you. Called on you.
This is going back to the question of why Abraham. Something that Bonnie said just sort of clicked in my head because she had said that sometimes the journey is different stages in life and having kids and so on. And of the other children that are listed, the other, at the end of the previous Parasha, Abraham is the only one without kids. So clearly he would be the one tempted to go to a new land where he was promised kids. So that was that might be why why Dafka Avram?
Of the three kids who were named at the end of last week's Parasha, he's the only one listed who does not yet have progeny, so therefore he's maybe a little feeling he's a little more prone to picking up and moving out because he doesn't have to worry about cleaning out little Timmy's bedroom where he grew up.
Well, no, also because he's being promised.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main part of the promise, that he will be blessed.
Right.
Many offspring. So
yeah, it's not a total cold call is the point. It's not like, hey, go move to Czechoslovakia, right? It's not Czech Republic. Sorry, it's not, hey, go move to the Czech Republic. It's if you move to I don't know. We're talking about the Czech Republic. If you move to the Czech Republic, you will get the following things, like cheap beer. I studied abroad in Prague. So. Good beer, right, Rabbi Schatz?
Yeah. Do you want to share any more on your particular theme? I just don't want to get us too off track.
I mean, why is that something you would ever be concerned about? There's definitely another piece I can layer in. Are there any of our more traditional commentators as opposed to the Rabbi Shapiro ramblings that you want to throw into the mix?
No, do the Rabbi Shapiro rambling, and then if it fits in at the end, then fine. But nothing that I feel like I need to share first.
The only other piece I wanted to throw in there, and it gets less in the heroes journey-y stuff, although I find that very interesting. Like I said, I have all sorts of books. I can do all sorts of show and tell. It's the hero within and inner reaches of outer space. And Rabbi Schatz, aren't you excited about the mosaic? Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
In the Jewish spiritual discipline known as Musar, through which you work on cultivating sort of one midah, like sort of one spiritual strength or attribute at a time. There are lots of classical Musar teachers. A man known as Alan Marinis is the author who has sort of brought this to a wider audience in the past couple of decades. And I've seen him differentiate between two different types of faith that come into play here in a way that I think is really interesting. He talks about the difference between emunah and bitachon. So both of which can kind of be translated as trust, or faith and trust rather. But he talks about how emunah is faith. It's sort of like a more intellectual grasping of what faith or belief or an understanding of God is, whereas bitachon is trust. It's more of an embodied sense of like action in the world beyond just an intellectual relationship or understanding of God. That bitachon is, okay, I have this emunah and now I'm going to go out into the world and embody it, which I think is an interesting sort of defining of two different terms, because I think they are slightly different things, right? I think it's one thing to have an intellectual understanding of something and another thing entirely to actually go out and live and act in accordance with that intellectual understanding. And I think that Avraham here is being called to do both, right? He's being called by this being who, as far as we can tell, he doesn't recognize on his caller ID yet. But then he's also being told to go out and make a pretty substantial change in alignment with that sort of more intellectual sense. It's not just, hey, believe in God. Okay, cool. I believe in God now. No, like you are receiving this call and now you need to go out and do it. So again, just like refracting that back outwards to us, I think it's an interesting question. When are the moments that you're able to like cultivate a sense of emunah, a sense of faith? And along with that, how do you then translate that emunah? How do you translate that faith into living your life with a sense of bitachon, with a sense of trust, with a sense of walking in the world, grounded in that faith that also then empowers you to live in the world in the way that you want to be living it. which is not easy, right? I think that there could be very, very long conversations to be had about how we collectively do that and how we individually do that. But I at least wanted to sort of toss that construct out there, since it seemed to be well in line with kind of the framework that we're talking about for these two verses. So I don't know if folks have thoughts in response to that, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, Marlise or Gary.
Just that when Rabbi Shapiro, you were mentioning the difference between the two terms, I immediately thought about the Yomoda Ani in the morning, which is Muna is the term used. And, I guess anyway, just it seems to me that would be more of a, what's more, less intellectual, I guess, than just your very life, in terms of waking up in the morning and still being alive. It's just, anyway, for me, it's hard. I'm just noticing, like, when I'm trying to daven, if I'm kind of rushing through, it's not as, I just have a different experience if I can actually sort of slow down and feel it, just get grounded. Yes. So anyway, those are just some thoughts that came to mind as you were talking.
Can you say more about that second piece? How do you see that davening piece connecting to the first thought?
I guess just when you were, contrasting the two terms, one is being more intellectual, one is more kind of, I guess walking in the world, having that trust, going forth. And I don't know, just somehow I connected that to a recent experience I had on the Minyan.
Yeah. So, and just to clarify for folks, so we all know what Marlise is referring to, right at the end of Modani, that the words are Rabba emunatecha, right? But interestingly, there it's actually saying, "Great is your faith." The antecedent there is God, right? Great is God's faith in us for restoring us life for this day, which is also a really interesting idea. Like, God, I'm grateful to God that God has restored me for this day to get out in the world and do what I'm gonna go do. So that, I always find that in and of itself to be an interesting construct as well.
The only piece that I was going to add that I will add while people are thinking, I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. The only piece I was going to add was this Orach Chaim piece, which is the beginning of what Rabbi Shapiro was mentioning in terms of the connection to the Akedah. But just this first part here, I'll read it for our podcast listeners. The Orach Chaim says, the Torah lists the departures according to the pain of leave taking involved. It is less painful to leave one's country than to leave one's birthplace, and it is even more painful to leave one's family. Abraham is commanded to leave in an ascending order of the nostalgia involved. So when Rabbi Shapiro suggested this theme to me, I was thinking about how it doesn't matter who the person is that's leaving. It actually might matter what you're leaving. So whether or not you are a strong person, or you are someone who worries with change, or you're someone who's just averse to change, that it doesn't actually necessarily matter who you are, what your character is. It actually might be the things that you are leaving that are affecting that departure. And so what is it that you're leaving? Are you leaving your family? Are you leaving a job? Are you leaving a community? Are you leaving just a place that you once lived and know but don't have connections to? All of those different circles that Abraham is, listed for him, but that he's leaving from, are very different types of departure, even if Abraham is the same guy leaving each of those places. So I found that really interesting in terms of this perspective into departure and who's leaving and the character of Abraham, but also that it's causative that which we're leaving that's around us. Okay, Denise and then Karen, you both had your hands shot up.
It makes me think about what Rabbi Shapiro said earlier, because I feel like it depends kind of depends what you're leaving. I don't know. I think that most people don't leave anything when it's going great. And so if you're leaving, you're probably happy about it or feeling like it's necessary or important or going to lead to something good. And I think that's different for Avraham because we don't know anything about his life up until this moment, but we definitely aren't told that anything was going wrong or sideways or had suddenly changed. And so it kind of reminds me of Rabbi Shapiro was saying in the beginning of, if he can do it, we can do it too type of thing, because he did it presumably when things were okay, or at least not recognizable to the reader as anything problematic, But
it's interesting that you categorize it that way, because in a certain way, God, it seems as though God is actually saying you do need to leave where you are, not because anything is problematic, but because that's where you're going to grow.
But most people don't think that way. Human beings who leave, it's not like, oh my God, I love where I am and I love my country and I love my family and I love my neighborhood and I have every opportunity possible. I'm going to go. Nobody does that.
That's interesting. I feel exactly the opposite. But it's interesting that you think that.
Soon as things are great, Rabbi Schatz is leaving, which is why we would like to announce that Rabbi Schatz is now.
Like even when Vice President Harris said she's going to look into the root causes of immigration, I was like, it's the same now as it was 10,000 years ago. Like people are leaving for a better life. They're either oppressed or hungry or both. That's it.
Yeah, but this is also, Abraham is not choosing to leave, right? Abraham is being told to leave. And I think that's also different, right? As both Hoffman, I don't know which Hoffman wrote this, but as Jews, we were more often forced to leave, right? And I think that whether it's because of oppression that we are forced to leave, or because we are being, forced out, or it's because there's just a new opportunity. I personally think, at least in the moments that I've moved in my life, it's bittersweet. Sure, I'm hoping that the thing that I'm going to is wonderful and is a place for me to set down roots and grow. And also, I'm sad to be leaving the thing that I'm leaving behind because it was meaningful to me. And I use this same example yesterday when I was talking about this in Midrashah, that we could read that same piece into the Holocaust, right? That when people were leaving their homes in Poland or anywhere, I'm just going to use Poland as an example, they of course knew that if they got out, that they would have a better chance of safety and life and longevity. And I can only imagine that it was very hard to leave because they didn't know what was going to happen to their place of home and of land and of friends and family. So I think that it depends what the leaving is. But again, I think that it's that which is surrounding you, both in the departure and in the homecoming, so to speak, that could potentially change the way that we see that change. Karen, and then Rabbi Shapiro has his, and then Bonnie. I thought you had your hand up.
So, New York City, living there, fine, blah, 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 in the middle of my PhD. And Michael says, how do you feel about living in California? So we pack up for 1 year. 1 year, I still have boxes. And I sublet, I didn't give it up, in New York. Well, man, we're going. Okay, maybe I knew my uncle's sister, and here we are. Okay, then I get connected to the amazing Temple Beth Am. And at some point, 10 years ago, maybe even longer, Michael says, what do you think about going to South Dakota to live? And the first thing out of my mouth after I said, what? I said, is there a synagogue? Okay, so the leaving was a very different experience for me because this place has become extremely important to me, the people. The community, the labels, folks,
right.
Well, my Havara, however you want to talk about it. And it's a different kind of leaving in a different stage of life.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure there was a community, something.
Right.
So unlike Abraham, I don't know if I was Abraham in either move, more so Abraham. But So moving can be very interesting experiences at your time in life, and 75 is not old. Just saying.
I was very careful.
Yes, you did.
I was very careful. I never said 75 is old.
What did you say?
I said that not early in life. I didn't say 75 was old.
Okay.
I was very careful, Karen.
Okay, never mind.
I will also just point out it's fitting on the day that we're honoring Michael that in this construct you're being called to leave by Michael. And I'll just sort of like leave it at that. But we're very excited to honor
Just be
Michael.
careful about it.
I just said it's interesting, and we're excited to honor Michael.
Okay.
All right.
Bonnie, and then we're going to wrap up.
I think I lost my thought. It had to do with. Oh yes. So in the Torah, God is actually speaking. I mean, Avram hears him, or in some way knows that it's God talking. How do we know when we are making these decisions to make these changes or moves, how God is impacting those, and that maybe there is something that is there where God is guiding us to those and new journeys?
Yeah. It's a really personal question. And
can you say that again? I just want to make sure I hear that question.
You're not serious, are you?
No, I heard it two different ways.
Okay. So, according to the Torah, we know that in some way, Avram heard God. However it was, he heard those words. He knew this was what was going to happen, and he made that journey. So maybe when I left Wisconsin and I had to make a decision to come here or elsewhere for graduate school, or Karen left New York, I mean, how do we know that God in some way wasn't impacting that decision?
Right.
But it was in a way unknown to us.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That thought just came to me.
Yeah, I think it's such a there are some people in my life who follow those signs, right? Who follow those little signs of, oh, you should go this place, or this is calling your name, or whatever. And there are other people who just don't believe in that at all. So I think it's a very personal question.
I don't know that I believe it, but I cannot imagine my life not being here and not having met my husband and not having had the experiences that I've had here. So I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And that's why so many people talk about like Beshert, right? That it was Beshert that you met someone, Beshert that you lived here, because there was something more than just happenstance that you ended up with the life that you felt blessed with. Yeah, it's a beautiful theological question, and one that I think for some people brings a lot of comfort, and for others maybe even some discomfort and some challenge. But Rabbi Shapiro is going to wrap this all up so that we can make sure that we spoke to his topic correctly.
I don't care if people speak to my topic correctly. I don't know what speaking to my topic correctly means. Well, when I was asking, I think I'm going to be talking about some of this tomorrow, by the way, at service. I was called to give the drash at services tomorrow.
Oh, you are giving the drash?
I am, yeah.
You're a sucker.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said about me. So if you're at Shul tomorrow, you might hear me refer to some of this as well. And if you're listening to the podcast after Shabbat, you were finding this repetitive after you heard me drash, I apologize retroactively or proactively? Actively. But when I was asking Rabbi Schatz if she felt called, she very rudely did not return the question. It's very, very, very rude that you didn't ask in return. Really not. I'm trying to get a dialogue going here, Schatz, and I'm not getting much back.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel called and sometimes I don't. And it's not necessarily about whether or not the objective facts have shifted, because the objective facts in my life day to day are pretty similar, right? But Bonnie, when you ask that question, like how do I know, right? And is there sort of God, how much is God working behind the scenes or not? And is it God? Is it not? I don't know that we'll ever know. I certainly don't think I'll know, but I will say that there are some days that I wake up and I feel really called to do what I'm doing professionally and personally, right? It was interesting that Rabbi Schatz was saying in working as clergy is not something she would define as being called to do by God, but something in her family is something that she did. I think that's a really interesting sort of juxtaposition. I think that's really interesting. But as I was thumbing through all these magnificent books I have in my office, a Joseph Campbell quote from another piece that I saw that I thought was really lovely. He wrote, "We have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all time have gone before us. Where we have thought to travel outward, we will come to the center of our own existence, and where we had thought to be alone, we will be with all the world." So I think that that's a really, really lovely thought with this archetype laid out by our forefather Avram, that we are all on our own journey, whether or not we feel called. We're definitely each on our own journey in this world, but something that we all share is that we're each kind of on this journey individually, but we're all doing it together. So I think that that's a lovely thought to leave us with as we say Lecha for now, and we'll see you next week. And Shabbat Shalom, folks.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.